Hey everyone, welcome to the Soul Tree Project, episode 32 here of the podcast. And what I have for you now is Katie Asmus. And Katie Asmus is a wonderful therapist with a lot of different expertise, I would say, focusing on trauma, somatic work, body movement, wilderness work. I mean, it goes on and on. Let me just read you quickly here a little bit about Katie as I introduce this podcast. Katie Asmus, Masters, LPC, BMP, describes her work as bringing forth the innate wisdom within every body and opening people's minds and hearts to greater possibilities. Founder of Namaste Healing Arts and Somatic Wilderness Therapy Institute, Katie practices as a somatic, nature-based, and adventure psychotherapist, life coach, educator, mentor, quest guide, and workshop facilitator. As I said, a lot of expertise. In addition to leading educational and therapeutic wilderness programs for the past 28 years, Katie focused her graduate thesis on body-centered interventions for working with trauma. She has presented internationally in these fields of study for the past 18 years. Currently, Katie trains counselors in advanced EMDR therapy skills. Look it up, it's pretty awesome, EMDR. Wilderness and adventure therapy, rites of passage, and somatic trauma work. She teaches graduate students at Naropa University and Prescott College, has a private counseling and coaching practice, leads rites of passage programs and trainings, and has published articles on the topics of trauma, ceremony, and ritual, and the use of conscious choice in wilderness work. Katie is an avid learner, creator, manifester, and lover of life. She is constantly in awe of the strength of the human spirit and the inherent wisdom of our body minds. For more information about Katie, visit www.namastehealers.com or another website coming soon, wilderness-therapy-institute.com. So there's an introduction there for you to Katie Asmus. Now, what I'd like before I go ahead and transition us into the conversation with Katie is just to say a few things here. And one of them is that, as the Soul Tree Project continues to progress, you'll notice that there's been a heavy emphasis on the YouTube channel lately, creating fun video content, little short videos with meaningful, engaging philosophies or thoughts on life, maybe questions, or premises about seeking and stuff like that. Now, I highly recommend you go check that out if you haven't yet. I think it's something that will continue evolving and getting better. Also, the Soul Tree Project is continuing to define what it is. And one of the things that I know about this podcast that I hope those of you who have been listening have found out by now is that it's an attempt to start to articulate some sort of wisdom out of many different threads of consciousness, philosophy, and experience from all these different fields. Like I said, it's an attempt. Whether or not it's been successful so far, I'll leave up to all of you. But what I'm getting out of it is a lot of learning and, a sense of being more clear and concise and how I process information and deliver it, but also, sort of redefining what it means to be a seeker. And one of the pieces that I'm really learning is to be a seeker is to constantly not have answers. As cliche as that sounds, it's so true. And, the other cliche, the more you know, or the more you learn, the less you know. It's amazing to me as I continue to enter into these vast compendiums of wisdom and tradition, how much question and uncertainty arises out of that field, and then leaves me having to attempt to put together these pieces of information and make them make sense so that I can integrate them in an embodied and healthy way into my own consciousness. Because after all, Soul Tree is all about individuation, as Carl Jung so aptly coined the term. And individuation is to move towards the center of the self, the Atman, as they say in Hinduism. And as we move around the labyrinth of being, we come in closer and closer to the self. We come in one layer and go out another and come in another. And there's this sense of continuity, and at that every step that you take is into another unknown aspect of the psyche, of the self, of the exploration of consciousness, and what it means to be human, what it means to be me or be you as an individual. And so my invitation, my suggestion as you listen to this podcast is to be the great questioner, as Socrates would advocate, and start to pick apart, where are the conflicts in your own consciousness, in your own philosophy? Where are the points of tension? Where are the points of interest? Where are the points of inspiration? Where are the points of clarification that lead you into a deeper process? And every step we take that I, in my belief, hopefully should be leading us to a deeper process. Not necessarily an answer, but a step that has more information and wisdom embodied within it. So let the journey continue evolving. Thank you for joining me here on the Soul Tree Project, episode 32. Katie Asmus, enjoy. I'll post something again soon. Hi everyone, welcome to the Soul Tree Podcast. I'm here with Katie Asmus, who is somebody that I've had a lot of interaction with over the years in professional trainings, and we've in those trainings really learned a lot from Katie about sequencing through strong emotions and somatic experiences in a therapeutic container. And to me, Katie is, as far as people I'm involved with, one of the most prominent figures in the field when it comes to somatic work and wilderness work. So it's such an honor to have you. And you've got, I was reading your bio this morning. It's just like a laundry list of experience and credentials, and from the LPC to the, the minute details of your training in somatic work and wilderness work.
Yes. Well, thanks. It's great to be here with you for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And this office is so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I love it. Yeah.
Thanks.
So thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I did kind of prepare some notes here just as a way to usher us in. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, where do you see the value of the therapeutic work as far as the long-term vision, whether it's from a humanitarian perspective or more from an individualistic perspective? What is the ultimate reason that keeps you going and doing this work?
Meaning like general therapeutic work, all of the therapeutic work?
Yeah, general, yeah, like the fact that you're interested in supporting people and working on themselves and healing and growing. I mean, and healing's a big word that I've heard you use on your website and different areas. So
yeah, oh my gosh, that's a great question. It's so big.
Yeah.
So one thing is, I feel like there's nothing else I'd rather do. And in some ways, it feels like a privilege to be able to have the space and the time and the resources and the capacity to spend time really specifically focused on healing and self-growth. And I believe so strongly in the wisdom of our body minds to heal, that we are always moving toward health or trying to move toward health and wholeness, and we have the capacity in our physiology to heal, whether that's physically or psychologically or spiritually. But sometimes we get stuck in ruts and our habits, right? And so sometimes we need support, whether that's a medical intervention or psychological or just emotional support, to kind of get back on track and connected to our own resources and capacity to heal. So I feel super committed to that, and in awe of humans and in awe of our capacities. And what I find over and over in working with clients is that in giving information, like we call it psychoeducation,
Yeah.
right? That often people say, oh my goodness, understanding this gives me a sense of hope and possibility, that you understand what's actually happening. And thus, and when I understand the client, you know, or when we understand what's happening, there's much more possibility to also understand and hold space for the healing process to happen.
Right.
And then also, I say this often as I'm teaching, I feel like what we're doing, what I'm doing in therapy and even, you know, in all the healing work, coaching, teaching, that it's world peace work, because I feel like it's really starting here. And this is what we have the most influence and control over. And if we heal ourselves, that's only going to ripple out to our relationships, to our families, to, you know, our interactions on the streets, to the world. And so I just think of all that work as impacting world peace.
Wow. That's a great answer.
Nice.
A few things came up for me. One is something I heard recently. I was listening to Dr. Gabor Mate.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about agency and reconnecting people to their own sense of agency. And how when we have very difficult life experiences, sometimes some of us can lose a sense of power or a sense of free will. That we have a choice of how we show up or even how we feel at some level. And so to me, like, part of what I envision when you're talking is that there's this way in which when we access our bodies and we do the work on ourselves, we can kind of recapture a creative sense of identity or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
and agency.
Yeah.
Well, and as you say that, as you know, I do a lot of trauma work and teach therapists about working with trauma from a somatic perspective. And the way that the definition of trauma that I use is the body's response, or the body-mind's response to a life-threatening or perceived life-threatening experience that does not fully sequence through the body. Right, which is there's something happens that's scary, life-threatening or perceived life-threatening. We have all these responses, adrenaline, cortisol, fight, flight, freeze, whatever happens. And, you know, as an animal, animals are built to move that through their bodies.
Yes.
But because of our big brains, our frontal cortex, there's a lot of ways that we stop it. And what happens is then our bodies feel the sense of activation or freeze. And then we're walking around the world in that way. And in trauma, you know, with that definition of trauma, always there's a component of not having choice.
Yes.
Right? That we didn't actually have agency.
In that moment.
Yes, that was taken away. Our choice, our control within the context of danger. And so when that fear response when it does move through the system, what happens is there's a sense of relief. And with that, there's a felt sense of, oh, I'm okay.
Right.
I'm okay. I made it through. I still have agency in my life. And when we don't sequence that, what happens is we're stuck in some semblance of fight, flight, or freeze, which then we feel like we don't actually have choice.
Right.
And then we recapitulate that, or it gets, you know, it happens over and over again in our lives because we start perceiving the world from that place of not having control or agency. Yes. And then that just gets reinforced. Oh, I don't have control over my life. So it's all very interconnected.
It's so interesting how there's these pivotal moments in people's lives, whether it's, you know, capital T trauma or, you know, other things that may not seem so significant but are still maybe traumatizing.
Right.
In these moments, you know, whether, you know, it's abuse or emotional confrontations or just deep personal feelings or whatever it would be.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of those intense moments get carried with us and then unconsciously repeated over time.
Yes.
And, you know, like, to the extent that there might even be some things I'm carrying that I no longer remember.
Right.
That
right.
I'm, you know?
Yes. And one piece that I've really kind of really gotten from EMDR, which is some of the work that I do, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is that along with whatever the incident is that happens and our bodies have this response, we tend to take on a belief about ourselves or the world in that moment when it's not resolved, such as I'm bad, or I'm not safe, or whatever, or it was my fault, something like that.
Right.
And again, what happens is if we don't fully move through that, and then as we move through it, we have often another perspective, like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or I'm okay, this didn't happen to me because of who I am.
Yes.
If that doesn't get resolved, then we take this belief, which is often not in our conscious, the forefront of our mind, and again, we start living in the world with this belief, I'm bad, or I'm not safe. And again, things happen out there, and we see it reinforces that. See, it's because I'm bad. See, it's because bad things happen to me.
Right.
And so again, there's that, the belief that gets kind of tied in and is part of what keeps reinforcing that state.
And it sounds like oftentimes the belief is self-blaming.
Yes.
Is what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Yes, which I have this theory. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone else say it this way, but what I often say to my clients is that, so shame, right? Then we take on shame. It's my fault. I'm bad. Often there's a sense of shame with that. And what I see it as is a false sense of control. Because when we're in those situations and we have no control, especially as a child, in an environment where it's maybe ongoingly abusive or dangerous or whatever else might be happening, it's terrifying to say, I have no control. Because if I have no control, anything can happen. So there's this way, and I think it's just a function of how we're built, in our brain and our development. But there's a part of us that goes, it must be my fault, because if it's my fault, that means I can actually do something about it, or I could have done something about it. And so even though there's this very painful experience of shame or bad or whatever the nuances that might go with it, there's also this way in which some part of us feels like we actually have more control. And so
which is safer in some ways than totally being out of control.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, that's brilliant.
And I often find when I share this with people as I'm doing, therapy or coaching or whatever we're doing, it makes sense. And there's something about having that understanding that gives us, our systems, our body minds, a little bit more space to actually feel the terror, to let that move through that thing that we couldn't feel because it was too scary, which is amazing. And then it creates another possibility to actually let go of the false sense of control. Then we land and feel our actual sense of control and agency.
With how we respond to what's out of our control.
Yes.
There's a cliche in the 12-step programs, the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes, I love
that's
that
profound
prayer.
In a way, that prayer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's perfect.
That's
placement
what you're
of
saying.
that right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there's this ongoing struggle in me because, on one hand, studying with Dr. Strachan, you get the extreme side of everybody does whatever they want to do at any given moment, and then they make up a story. And he's not a huge proponent of the trauma narrative.
Right.
Because in his opinion, you can only be traumatized if you're traumatizable.
Right.
From a predisposition. So on one hand, I've got him, yammering away and saying these things. On the other hand, there's this other part of me that's saying, well, yes, and life, we're all human. And we although we're all unique, to Strachan's point, which is a brilliant point, that shouldn't be overlooked, we're all human, and we also experience similar things, and we all have to deal with struggles and, call it whatever you want. But the reality is things seem to get stuck somehow. It seems to me, I could be wrong about that, but it seems to be something we could safely say.
Yes.
Right?
Well, what I would say, a couple comments here.
Yeah.
One is that, I often say to be human is to have some level of trauma, right? Whether that's, like you said, big T trauma, something on the high end of the spectrum that a lot of people would think is something that would be traumatic, to the low end, which might be, we're walking down the street and something flashes in front of us and we startle and we're already having a bad day and we get super activated and never come back down, right? I mean, that's...
Right.
But there's a spectrum, and I think we can't, because of our socialization, really, and hearing, like, big girls don't cry and don't do that, you're making a scene, and all the things that we're told, we stop our emotions, we stop our screaming, we stop our, crying. Babies just do it. They just express whatever's moving through their bodies, and then, they scream, and 10 minutes later they're laughing. And there's all these ways that we learn, that we're socialized to stop our responses. And so between, just the natural events of being human, the fears that come out of nowhere, that may or may not be actually, very impactful in our life, there's a lot of ways that our systems can go into fight, flight, freeze and not actually move through. And then I think there's a key piece that my understanding of what, Roger talks about, the way that I would personally interpret that from my lens, is that, an incident happens, your response is going to be different from my response or someone else's response, which is really based on many things, right? Based on genetics, based on your perception, based on in trauma work, what we call resiliency factors, which are what are all the factors in your life building up to this point, whether that be, culture, sexual orientation, physical health, resources, on and on and on, right? That impact your perspective, impact your sense of safety, impact your capacity to get support, and all the experiences you've had thus far. That something happens for one person, I may have a trauma response, which to me is really a biochemical, neurophysiological response, and you may not, or you may have a lesser one and be able to move through it. And so our responses and reactions and experiences might be totally different.
Totally. It's so nuanced.
Yes.
Yeah, and exactly. With Roger, there's a lot of value in really focusing on the uniqueness. But in order to have any coherent model to talk about, there's a sense of needing to be able to, not to generalize, but to focus on what's shared as well.
Yes.
But that was great. Thank you for all that. My next question is, so you actually had in here, how do you define trauma? And you just dove right into that. That was perfect. Great. My next question is, this is kind of a segue from what we were just talking about. This is like an ancient philosophical argument, like the essentialists and the existentialists, right? So on one side you have who we are is inherent, and then on the other side you have existence precedes essence. So we exist, and then we make up an essence based on those experiences. I always feel like I try to orient myself somewhere in between the two, because I do feel a sense of identity that is underneath like the structures that we've experienced in society and life experience. And I also feel like all that experience adds a sense of, texture and context, and it's not one or the other. One thing I'm aware of, to kind of wrap this long-winded question up, in the trauma field, is a lot of stuff that gets said is pointing in the direction of you are what happens to you. My critique of that is that it leaves out some of the essentialists' viewpoints. Where do you stand on this idea? That's
a great question. In the middle, okay. I would say. So I feel like I have been studying officially and non-officially humans most of my life, right? And because I love humans, and I'm so curious about why we are how we are, and how and why we do what we do, and what's our motivation. And it's one of the most fascinating things of my life. And I think that I've read all these theories for years, and I've been working with people for 30 years and trained in counseling psychology for 21 years. I started going to school studying this. And have worked with thousands of people in different contexts.
Yeah.
And what I really think it's a combination, because if you look at babies come into the world with a personality
Right.
and a temperament, and, like Roger's parts work
Right.
model, you see from the very beginning, personality, preferences,
Yes.
ways of responding. And then, of course, our environment impacts us. If we're in a tense, hostile environment, that's going to absolutely impact our development. If we're in a relaxed, more loving, nurturing environment, that's going to impact our development. And, beliefs about the world. There's also the whole attachment theory and
Right.
body of work that Gabor Mate works with, and which I feel also very strongly impacts us.
Yeah.
Which is really how we bond with our primary caregivers, primarily 0 to 18 months, though it can go on for the rest of our lives, which sets up a template for ourselves about people and about the world and our capacity to self-regulate.
Right.
Which is really significant, because as that gets set up, our capacity to self-regulate, which again, some people come into the world with more capacity to self-regulate, and others don't, right? There's like colicky babies, and and they say easygoing, whatever, the different words that are used, but and then impacted by our caregivers. Then later in life, when we experience stress, that's going to be on top of all these other experiences, our development, which again is a combination of both how we came into the world and then all of the experiences that have impacted us. So I think you can't separate that. And, how many times do you meet people from the same family who have very different personalities,
True enough.
very different ways of coping in the world?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's similarities, but again, one person can cope in a way that's actually very harmful and dysfunctional, and another person might be extremely responsible and overachieving, and both of them are coping mechanisms, but they really play out in very different ways. So I just think really that both are impactful, and for some people, what they come into the world with, the nature, is much stronger than the nurture, whereas other people, depending on whatever probably the genetics are, the nurture can be more impactful.
That's one of the best answers I've heard, and the reason I say that is because it's so nuanced. One of my biggest complaints is that people, they get sucked into one view of things. For example, the social constructionists, everything's a social construct.
Right.
It's like, it drives me nuts. I'm saying, come on, you gotta go a little further than that. Like that doesn't do it for me. But then on the other hand, you can get too essential and say, oh, it's all determined.
Right.
Your whole life is mapped out. So thank you for that. I appreciate the nuance. It's refreshing in a time where things tend to get, kind of just straddled into this really tight space. So
yes.
Thank you.
Well, and I think based on, so many people that I've worked with, I always have this question, why, one person that has the most horrific, challenges and abuses in their life, one person can become the most functional person on the planet, while someone else can't get out of bed, or someone has been given everything. And again, one person takes that and is able to, step into a career of helping others, while someone else, again, has a hard time holding a job and not getting out of bed. And so it's just like it's so not simple.
And the differences aren't good or bad.
Right.
Right? Like, it's easy to assign value. Oh, you're more resilient, so you're better.
Right.
But it just is what it is. Right? Like,
yes.
I know that there's that. It's easy to start making value judgments about all this,
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And what we value might not even always be healthy here.
Yeah. Which kind of is another segue here. Like, one of the things I've noticed in any type of facilitation or therapeutic work is the ability to separate a little bit from the value judgments creates some space. What is your experience with value and shame and doing personal work with people?
Yeah, I tend to lean more toward curiosity.
Right.
And hearing the person's experience. Like, what is this like for you? Because just like I was talking about with something that's scary happens, you're going to respond differently than I'm going to respond.
Yeah.
Your perception's going to be different from my perception. So I might think, wow, that sounds hard, or that sounds challenging or scary. And I might even say that, but I don't actually know what your experience is. And so as I'm working with people, I really, two things. One, tend to lean toward curiosity and hearing your experience, hearing the other's experience. And the other piece is I really believe that every impulse we have comes from a place of health. The way that we live it out isn't always helpful or nourishing, or might get us in trouble, etc. But the impulse itself is based on a basic need.
Attempt to move towards the sunlight, like the tree. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's a sense of both curiosity about what's the health here, what's actually underlying what's already happening, and what's your experience of it.
Right.
Because, I might think that, oh, this sounds really challenging. You might say, I feel really empowered doing this thing.
Right.
Or in this experience.
Yeah.
So
what about the value that someone imposes upon themselves? Like, for example, if I say, well, I'm depressed, and then I feel ashamed about feeling depressed because it's not good to be depressed. Like you were talking earlier about how sometimes we get stuck in these, something bad happens or something, we carry something with us and then we have a story about it.
Yes.
Like I'm bad.
Yeah.
How do you work with that?
Well, as you say that, I think about a couple things. One is that there are layers of our experience. So especially when there's something that's traumatic, there's the experience, right? And then there's the physiological response. There's the beliefs that go along with that. There's the feelings that we have toward that. And interesting, in chronic pain studies, what they found is the feeling toward the pain impacts the level of pain more than the pain itself. And I think the same is true psychologically and emotionally.
They found that?
Yes.
Wow, that's an amazing find.
Yeah. And so similarly, emotionally, right, we have the experience of depression or whatever it might be, and then we have the feelings toward it, right, that actually exacerbate it and make it more painful, the way that we actually treat ourselves.
That's so fascinating. I've always said for a long time that someone told me this statistic a while ago that so-and-so percentage, like over 50% of car accidents are caused by overcorrections.
Whoa.
I don't know where I could find that again, but I've always thought that. I've always thought that the way that we respond to the phenomenology of the moment is more impactful than what's actually happening.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It made my day.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And so I'll do a lot of parts work as well.
Yes.
Different models of parts work, because it really starts to look at what are we saying to ourselves about this? What are our fears? How can we bring more self-compassion in? How can we bring more compassion into our own system versus adding more abuse from the inside, because that's only making things worse. Right. And so that's where I tend to start is, how are you feeling toward yourself? How are you feeling toward what's happening? And start to work that layer.
Yeah. Oh, I can so relate. Like I noticed with me when I start getting in a hard time, like all the transitions I've been going through lately, I'm dealing with, like sometimes I just feel disconnected, or like things aren't clicking the way I want them to. And then all of a sudden, like that feeling is one thing. And then I come in and I start laying some heavy trip on it. Like, oh, you're not focused enough. And, you haven't done this, this, and this. And then what happens is it exacerbates the primary phenomena, which was that I wasn't feeling I was feeling a certain way. And then it almost adds fuel to that fire.
Yes.
And one of the things that has really helped me over the years is when I notice something, and this is meditation really, is to just watch it.
Yes.
And say, oh, that's interesting. Like, I'm experiencing this.
Yes.
I'm having this experience. And it's amazing how it has less and less power over me.
Yes. That's a great description. The other piece that I think is really important in here, one of the beliefs that I have and kind of the ways that I kind of verbalize this that you're speaking to is I think many of our problems or challenges as humans come from an inability to tolerate sensation and energy in our bodies, both positive and challenging. And so what happens is in anxiety, I'll just say, or depression, two words that we use a lot, right? There's a sensation happening, and then we're afraid of it. We don't like it. We start judging ourselves as an attempt to control it or get rid of it.
Wow.
And really, it's a particular life energy moving through us. And if we can create space, physical space, emotional space, to name it, to recognize it, it actually often moves. It doesn't stay the same. And granted, this is complex. I mean, I know there are some ingrained biochemical patterns that people can experience. So I don't want to be super simplistic about it.
Yeah.
But, right, when we give it space, when we recognize, get to the most subtle, like, oh, tight chest. Oh, energy running down my arms.
Yes.
Then it can keep moving as opposed to solidifying.
Wow.
And same with what's good,
Yeah.
And the Hendricks, Gay and Kathleen Hendricks, they talk about the upper limit. That when we start to feel too good, it scares us and we do something to stop the good.
Oh my God.
Right?
That happened to me like a week ago. I had this amazing day. I was out in the wilderness and I was feeling really meaningful and like my whole life was orbiting in a specific way that felt empowering. And then I joked with someone. I was like, I gotta go home and get in a fight with my girlfriend because this is too intense.
Yes.
I gotta bring the energy back down.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I didn't do that, but it was a way
Great
of
that
making
you noticed
fun
it. Yes.
of the tendency to try to thwart it because it was like this expansive, enlightening experience I was having, and part of me couldn't
tolerate
accept it. Yeah.
Which is really, really human. And so honestly, half of the work that I do with people, even with trauma, is tolerating good feelings. Because the same part of our brain that registers positive feelings, also it's the same part that registers our challenging feelings. And most people want to feel good. And so when we actually work on tolerating feeling good, it's helping us tolerate feeling and tolerate feeling energy and a way in so that we can start to befriend that and not be as afraid of that. And it just increases our tolerance overall.
Right.
And it's amazing because just like with, trying to get away from the challenging feelings, often when we start to feel good, one common experience is for the critic to come in or the fear to come in.
Right.
Which
self-critic, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because our survival brain can have this habit that said, if we've experienced trauma, that says, I like to say, this part of our brain says, I'm not going to let this happen to you again. Now I'm going to look for the danger. I'm going to look for the danger so that this doesn't happen again. So when we start to relax, that part of our brain kicks in and says, no, don't relax. Something bad's going to come out of nowhere. And so the work around tolerating good is actually profound and is a way that also often illuminates that habit. And then even again in this psychoeducation, sharing this piece with people go, oh, that actually feels true. I think that is what is happening.
Right.
And then there's more choice to be able to recognize it and say, oh, I don't have to believe that voice. Maybe there is actually nothing bad happening right now. And right now I can actually let myself relax.
Wow.
Which then there's more space to start to introduce that experience into our system.
It's incredible. It's incredible work that you're doing and so needed. I think when we look at the way that we're being stimulated as a society, right, as individuals, at least around here, in the West, very technological.
Yeah.
Very stagnant at times. There's not a lot of connection to the body. There's a lot going on in the mind and in certain parts of the brain, but there's this connection to the somatic experience of just existing.
Mm-hmm.
We're no longer, a lot of us, at least, not to make an overgeneralizations, are no longer working the fields or, making things or, constantly engaged with our bodies and our hands. So it seems to lead to this place where we need to reconnect.
Yes, I would totally agree with that. We get stagnant in our bodies, and then those habitualized patterns get fed, right? And even overstimulation of our nervous systems in a particular way without the movement. And movement is how we shift states. Movement is how we feel our own aliveness and our own capacities and our own agency. Coming back to the agency, we feel it from the inside out. It's not just a thought.
Yeah, it seems to be prevalent that there's a disconnection from the animal side of living.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's so true.
You could call it instinct or whatever it would be. And it's interesting how in your teaching I've heard you use kind of the analogy of the deer.
Uh-huh.
You're watching the deer get chased by a predator, whether it's a mountain lion or a wolf or whatever it would be. And then you notice that after it gets away, it starts shaking, sequencing through the body all that energy. It's intelligently allowing that to be okay, to pass through.
Yes.
But then you look at us. That's an instinct that deer is just naturally doing, but we have somehow have we cut it off?
Yes, that's what I was speaking to when I was talking about the kind of socialization, the part of us that says, don't do that, you're going to look weird. Control yourself.
Oh, I see.
You're okay. The ways that we have learned, don't actually express yourself because there's a problem with that.
Right.
And we internalize that. And so we stop it, hold it together. I need to hold it together. I need to go into work. Whatever it is, we then can actually bypass or inhibit our natural physiological response.
Right.
Whereas if we, again, this is where psychoeducation is so helpful, when we understand, this is actually healthy, right? When my clients say, I'm shaking generally, when we're doing a piece of work, there's some surprise and fear that goes with that. And inevitably I say, that's great. Right. Actually, let that move. This is really good. This is the old fear leaving your body. And when we can know that, there's more acceptance, there's more safety, there's more trust to let this weird thing happen to us, in a way that we might feel out of control, to know, this is the wisdom of my body, knowing how to release the adrenaline and the cortisol and the fight, flight, freeze response that just, happened in response to this danger or the perceived danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems to me like we're so far away from it right now. Again, generalizations, but a lot of us are so far away from that kind of primal sense of agency that we need people like you. Right? We really do. We need people like you.
To normalize our humanity and our wildness.
Right, but you've already, in a lot of ways, you've done this hero's journey or whatever you want to call it, where you've experienced these things, you've trained in these things, but you dove into the fire so that now you can sit in front of someone and say, we can work this. This is a workable thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Thanks.
So thank you for doing that work.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, again, it comes from my passion and curiosity about our humanness. And just, I'm in awe of us and our capacities to heal. And I probably shared this with you before, but, and this was my thesis work, like 20 years ago. And when I learned this, first read Peter Levine's work, Somatic Experiencing, which is really the basis of kind of where my work started, and had this epiphany, as we understand what's happening, then we can allow it to happen and move toward health and healing. And at that point, 20 years ago, I thought, everybody on the planet needs to know this.
Yes.
And so, interesting, I'll give Peter Levine's books to my friends with kids. Like, he has a book about how to work with kids and trauma for parents and teachers and caregivers. And I just feel like it's it's almost like the handbook to humanity, you know, the
Yeah.
handbook to our physical bodies. And if we knew this, our lives would be a little bit more spacious and compassionate and easeful.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It's so strange how, whatever it is, society or rules, regulations, expectations, it does affect the way that we adjust, it seems.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have such false expectations. And I have to say, I feel like our culture and our media has done such a disservice to our expectations of what it means to be a healthy, successful human.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many people come in and compare themselves to people on Facebook and compare their relationships to the movies. And
Oh, wow.
we don't actually have a lot of really great information and mentoring around the challenges of humanity, of being human.
Right.
And it's like, well, let's just buy the quick fix. Let's cut it off. Let's medicate it. Let's, and obviously sometimes that's helpful, but there's a million ways to dissociate these days. There's a million ways to not feel our feelings. There's a million ways to distract ourselves. And so but we don't actually get support around just the challenges and normalcy of imperfection of being human.
Absolutely. There's a myth that I've subscribed to, and whether it's true or not, I choose to take it on, and that's that everybody at the core of their being has a place inside of them that's connected to an individual sense of purpose, not only purpose, but deep identity and connection. Mm-hmm. And that the work that I'm passionate about is to find that place and to be able to expand it into our life more and more and more. And I really believe if everybody took that journey on, I mean, we would live in a better world, a much better world.
Yes.
Because I think at that place of deep connection, it does serve all things. It's not purely selfish self-work, right? Like I'm only interested in bettering myself. So to me, turning inward, rather than looking outward for how can I justify my existence, it's looking inward to answer that hard question, because that's a question at some level we're all asking.
Yes.
How can I justify the fact that I'm having an experience?
You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
But that's so true, and I feel like so much of what I hear here, in my practice are the shoulds. Yeah. Like, I should feel this way, or I should be living this way, or I should be more like that person, or I should... And that's just not true. We're all so different. I like to say, know yourself and set yourself up for success. Know yourself and find what are the ways that I need to live. What are my preferences? What are my needs? What's my rhythm? What time do I need to go to bed? How many hours of sleep do I need?
Right, individuate.
How much self-time do I need? And everybody's different.
Yes.
But we get so caught up in that there's some right way, or that I should be more of this or less of this, and it's so much. There's so much painfulness then, right? It's how do we feel toward ourselves that makes it more painful.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
You're so welcome.
You're so easy to talk to.
Oh, thanks.
Like sometimes I have to do a lot of work, and today it was just like, I don't have to work too hard because I know that Katie's you can generate a lot of meaning and content. So thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Well, these are my passions, as you know. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking about it and living it.
Yeah. Well, I was telling you before we started that my goal is to share people like you with the world. You're already sharing yourself with the world, but to provide another platform for meaningful ideas to be shared. And so thank you for being a part of that. And where would people go to find you if they're looking to see what you're doing or maybe do a workshop?
Great. Well, okay, so I'm in transition here. Currently, today, my website is www.namastehealers.com.
Okay.
And I'm in the midst of changing my website to www.wildernesstherapyinstitute.com, which is not fully up and running, but one of those two will have information about my therapy and coaching, mentoring, my trainings for therapists and educators and guides, and Rites of Passage work. Those are kind of the main areas that I work with.
Right on. Well, everyone, I couldn't recommend it more. Katie's one of those people that I've learned a tremendous amount from. So please go check that out. And thank you so much for coming.
Oh, my goodness.
Let's do it again sometime if you're willing.
Yeah, great.
Right.
Thanks, Ryan.